My stepmom stole my $120,000 college fund for her daughter's Euro trips. So I took her rental property and left her with nothing. I sank deeper into the worn leather couch, nursing my glass of wine as the familiar chaos of Thanksgiving unfolded around me. My father, Eric's house, always felt like a battlefield during holidays, especially since he'd married Diane 7 years ago. The merger had brought Diane's 2 daughters, Amber and Taylor, into my life like unwelcome storm clouds. This particular Thanksgiving felt even more strained than usual. I had just finished my final exams for the fall semester of my senior year, running on caffeine and determination for the past 2 weeks. The circles under my eyes had prompted concerned comments from my Aunt Martha, which Diane had smoothly deflected with remarks about young people and their partying. The assumption stung. I couldn't remember the last time I'd been to a party. Between classes, my waitressing job, and my internship at a local property management company, I barely had time to sleep, let alone socialize. Across the room, Amber was showing off photos from her recent trip to Switzerland, her 3rd European excursion in 2 years. The casual way she flipped through images of hostels and train passes made my chest tighten with a familiar mix of resentment and confusion. My father was comfortably upper middle class as an engineering director, yes, but not European vacation every year wealthy. Yet somehow there was always money for Amber and Taylor's adventures, while I scraped by on scholarships and loans. Behind me I could hear Taylor chatting with our step-cousin Bradley about her plans to study art history in Florence next semester. "It's all arranged," Taylor was saying with the casual confidence of someone who had never had a request denied. "Mom says it's important to be culturally well-rounded." I took another sip of wine, letting the slightly bitter Cabernet wash over my tongue. Cultural well-roundedness hadn't been a priority when I'd asked for help to attend a journalism conference in Chicago last year. Diane had apologetically explained that the family budget was tight, and Dad had nodded along, distracted by work concerns. "Jess, how's the final semester prep treating you?" my father asked, momentarily breaking away from his conversation with Diane's brother. "It's good," I replied, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. "Tough but good. I'm finalizing my capstone project for my business degree. My property management internship is actually informing a lot of my research. The student loans must be crushing," my Uncle Paul commented with a sympathetic grimace. "My son's drowning in debt from his MBA." I nodded, taking another sip of wine to wash down the bitterness. 4 years of working 2 jobs while maintaining a full course load had nearly broken me. The debt that loomed over my future, already at $120,000 with my final semester still to finance, felt like a mountain I might never scale. My father frowned. "What do you mean loans? That's what the college fund was for." The room didn't exactly fall silent, but a strange stillness seemed to spread from where I sat. I looked at my father, confusion blooming across my face. "What fund?" Dad's expression shifted from puzzlement to concern. "Your college fund. The one I've been putting money into since you were born." My heart began to race. "Dad, I don't have a college fund. I've been taking out loans. I'm already $120,000 in debt." The color drained from my father's face so rapidly that I thought he might faint. His eyes darted to Diane, who suddenly became very interested in rearranging the dinner rolls in their basket. "Diane?" Dad's voice was eerily quiet. "What's Amelia talking about?" Diane laughed, a brittle sound that scraped against my nerves. "Eric, we discussed this already, remember? Years ago the college fund wasn't performing well, and we made some adjustments." Amber, Diane's oldest daughter at 22, rolled her eyes dramatically. "She's always so confused about money. Dad, you explained all this to her before she started college." My eyes narrowed at the dad that so casually dropped from Amber's lips. My father had never legally adopted either of Diane's daughters, yet they claimed him as their own from day one. "I'm not confused," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "And we never had that conversation." Dad stood up abruptly, his napkin falling to the floor. "Diane, I need to speak with you, now." As they left the room, Amber and Taylor exchanged glances that made my stomach churn. There was something knowing in their expressions, something smug that made me want to scream. Uncle Paul cleared his throat. "Maybe I should check on the turkey." Left alone with my stepsisters, I felt like I was sitting across from predators. Taylor, the younger at 19, leaned forward. You really should pay more attention to your finances, Jess. It's called being an adult. I didn't respond. My mind was racing, piecing together fragments of conversations and memories from the past 4 years. The way Diane had discouraged me from asking my father for help with tuition, the vague comments about investments not performing well, the suggestion that student loans were character building. Meanwhile, Amber had spent a semester in Paris. Taylor had toured Italy last summer, and both drove cars I couldn't afford to dream about while I took the bus to my waitressing job after classes. The sound of raised voices drifted from my father's study. I had never heard him yell like that before. The Thanksgiving turkey cooled on the dining table, forgotten, as the minutes stretched into an hour. When Dad finally emerged, his face was ashen. Diane trailed behind him, mascara streaking her cheeks. "Amelia," my father said, his voice hollow. "I need to show you something." In his study, Dad pulled up his banking records on his computer with trembling fingers. He pointed to a series of transactions, $2,500 monthly withdrawals, like clockwork, for 4 years. "This was your college fund," he said, the words catching in his throat. "I set up automatic transfers to an account Diane managed. She told me it was going to your tuition payments." I stared at the screen, nausea rising in my throat. Approximately $120,000 gone. Money that could have paid for my education and given me a debt-free start to adult life. "I trusted her," Dad whispered, and the betrayal in his eyes made my heart break for him. "She was supposed to be handling the payments directly to your school. She said it was easier that way." "Dad," I began, but words failed me. He clicked through more records, his movements becoming more agitated. "Look at this. The same day the money transferred out, there are deposits to another account." He pulled up another screen. "And here, payments to airlines, tour companies, clothing stores." I felt lightheaded. While I'd been living on ramen and working until 2 a.m., my stepmother had been funneling my college fund to finance her daughter's lifestyles. "I'm calling the police," Dad said, reaching for his phone. "Wait," I caught his arm. "Let's think this through." Dad looked at me, confusion momentarily displacing his anger. "Think what through? She stole from you. From us. That's a crime." "I know," I said, "but if she goes to jail right now, what happens to the money? It's probably already spent, and if there's a criminal case, it could take years to resolve." Dad's shoulders slumped as the reality of the situation sank in. "You're right, but we can't let her get away with this." I squeezed my father's hand. "We won't, but we need to be smart about it." The remainder of Thanksgiving passed in a fog of tension and awkward silences. Diane made a show of having a migraine and retreated to the bedroom. Amber and Taylor exchanged texts under the table, occasionally shooting venomous glances at me. After dinner, Dad pulled me aside. "I've spoken with a lawyer friend," he said quietly. "He's coming over tomorrow to discuss our options. For now, I've frozen all the accounts Diane has access to." I nodded, still processing the magnitude of the deception. "What about Amber and Taylor? Do you think they knew?" Dad's expression hardened. "From the way they were acting, almost certainly. But we'll deal with that later." That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept circling back to all the nights I'd worked double shifts to pay for textbooks, all the times I'd called my father, carefully avoiding asking for money because Diane had convinced me that his business was going through a rough patch, the birthdays and Christmases when my gifts from them had been noticeably modest compared to the extravagant presents my stepsisters received. By morning, grief had hardened into resolve. I had always been the diplomatic one in family conflicts, the one who sought compromise to maintain harmony in our blended family. But years of business classes, and my internship at the property management firm, had taught me about contracts, negotiations, and leverage. Those skills, normally reserved for my professional life, now seemed perfectly suited for the situation at hand. The lawyer, Daniel Richards, arrived at 10. A stern-faced man with shrewd eyes. He listened carefully as Dad and I laid out the situation. "This is straightforward theft and fraud," he said when we finished. "We have clear documentation of the money transfers and what they were intended for. The issue is whether you want to pursue criminal charges or handle this civilly." "What would you recommend?" Dad asked. "Criminal charges would likely result in jail time for your wife," Daniel said bluntly, "but as Amelia pointed out, recovery of funds becomes complicated. A civil suit might be more effective for getting compensation, but it's still a lengthy process and there's no guarantee the money hasn't been spent. There's another option." I said quietly. Both men turned to look at me. Diane cares about two things, money and appearances. We can use that. Dad raised an eyebrow. What do you have in mind? I leaned forward, my expression resolute. We threaten both. Tell her we'll press charges and make sure everyone in her social circle knows exactly what she did, unless she makes restitution immediately. Daniel nodded slowly. Essentially, we offer her a choice, face public humiliation and potential jail time, or pay back what she stole. With interest, I added firmly. And I want it documented properly this time, with full transparency. Dad looked at me with newfound respect. The accommodating girl who had always sought to keep the peace, who had endured years of subtle undermining from my stepmother without complaint, was revealing a strength he hadn't fully recognized before. My business courses and internship had clearly given me tools beyond what he'd realized. Let's do it, Dad agreed. But I have one addition. I want a full accounting of where the money went. Every penny. Daniel made notes on his legal pad. I should warn you both, this approach comes with risks. If Diane feels cornered, she might decide to fight rather than settle, and divorce cases can get ugly, especially when there are financial improprieties involved. I'm not afraid of ugly, I said. I've been living with it for 7 years. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Dad would confront Diane with the evidence but offer her a way out, one that would satisfy my need for justice while avoiding a public scandal that would devastate Diane's carefully cultivated social image. As Daniel drafted the necessary documents, Dad and I went through the house methodically, documenting valuables and assets, the artwork Diane had insisted on purchasing, the jewelry collection she'd amassed, the luxury car she drove. When Diane finally emerged from the bedroom around noon, her face was puffy from crying, but her expression was defiant. I suppose you've called your lawyer, she said to Dad, ignoring me completely. He's in the study now, Dad replied coldly. We need to talk. Diane smoothed her cashmere sweater. There's nothing to talk about. That money was for family expenses. We agreed. We never agreed to anything of the sort, Dad cut her off. And we both know it. The only question now is how much worse you want to make this for yourself. In the study, Daniel laid out the terms. Diane would sign over assets equivalent to the stolen funds, plus interest. She would move out immediately. The divorce would proceed quietly, with Diane receiving nothing beyond what she brought into the marriage. In exchange, we wouldn't press criminal charges or expose her actions to their social circle. This is extortion, Diane hissed. No, Daniel corrected calmly. This is mercy. The alternative is calling the police right now. Diane's eyes darted between the three faces watching her. I need to consult my own lawyer. Fine, Dad said. You have 24 hours. After that, we're going to the police. As Diane stormed out, I felt a strange calm settle over me. For the first time in years, I was standing up for myself. It felt good. The next 24 hours were surreal. Diane locked herself in the guest room, emerging only to make hushed phone calls. Amber and Taylor arrived, demanding to know what was happening, only to be met with Dad's stony silence. I found myself unexpectedly calm amid the storm. I spent the morning researching property values in the area, using skills I'd developed during my internship. The rental property Diane had mentioned, a small but aging apartment building in a transitioning neighborhood, had potential but also significant deferred maintenance issues, according to county records. Still, with proper management, it could be valuable. I printed out tax assessments, recent comparable sales, and rental market analyses, preparing myself for the negotiations to come. Around noon, I overheard Amber and Taylor in the kitchen, their voices rising in indignation. This is ridiculous, Amber shouted as my father refused to engage. Mom was just trying to help us have the experiences we deserved. I had been observing quietly from the doorway, but now I stepped forward. With money that was meant for my education, Amber whirled on me. Oh please, you got to go to college, didn't you? We had to make do with community college courses because you were hogging all of Dad's attention and resources. Hogging resources? I laughed incredulously. I worked 2 jobs and took out massive loans while you were touring Europe on my dime. Girls, Dad interjected, his voice weary. Enough. Amber, Taylor, he said firmly. I suggest you go home. This is between your mother and us now. You can't just throw us out, Taylor protested. This is our home too. No, Dad said firmly. It's not. It never was. You have your own place, paid for with money that should have gone to my education. I suggest you enjoy it while you can, because that gravy train has officially derailed. As my stepsisters left, hurling threats and insults, I felt a pang of sadness for what might have been. If we'd truly been a family, if Diane had treated me with even a fraction of the care she lavished on her own daughters, how different would our lives be now? But that alternate reality had never existed, and now I was focused on salvaging my future from the wreckage of Diane's deception. 23 hours after the ultimatum, Diane's lawyer arrived. A sleek woman in an expensive suit who introduced herself as Catherine Wong. She requested a private meeting with Daniel. The two lawyers sequestered themselves in the study for over an hour while Dad and I waited anxiously in the living room. When Daniel emerged, his expression gave nothing away. "We have a counteroffer," he announced. Diane wanted to keep her car and some of her personal jewelry. In exchange, she would transfer ownership of a rental property she'd inherited from her first husband to me. The property, a small apartment building with 4 units, generated approximately $3,000 in monthly income when fully occupied, but was currently operating at a loss due to vacancies, deferred maintenance, and tax liens. "It's potentially worth more than what she took," Daniel explained, "but it needs significant work. She's desperate to avoid criminal charges, and she knows she's cornered. She sees the property as a liability, not an asset." I glanced at my father, who nodded slightly. "We'll take it," I decided, "on one condition. I want a written confession from her, admitting exactly what she did." Catherine frowned. "My client has agreed to compensate you generously. A confession could still be used against her later." "That's the point," I said coolly. "Insurance that she doesn't try to spin this into a different story later. The confession stays private unless she violates our agreement." After more negotiation, Diane reluctantly agreed. The documents were signed that evening. In a bitter irony, Diane had to borrow money from her brother to pay for the moving truck that came the following day. 1 year later, I was in my small office, reviewing the financial reports for my rental property. The past 12 months had been a crash course in property management, dealing with difficult tenants, navigating city regulations, and coordinating repairs on a tight budget. My business degree had provided a foundation, but the reality of managing the building had proved far more challenging than classroom theory. 2 of the units had required complete renovation before they could be rented. The roof had leaked during spring rains. One tenant had stopped paying rent for 3 months before I could navigate the eviction process. But slowly, painstakingly, I turned the property around. The building was now fully occupied with reliable tenants. The income had allowed me to pay off some of my student loans, though I still had years of payments ahead of me. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. "Dinner tonight? I have news." Over pasta at our favorite Italian restaurant, Dad seemed more relaxed than I'd seen him in years. The divorce had been finalized 6 months earlier, and though the process had been emotionally draining, he'd emerged with a newfound sense of confidence. "I ran into Taylor yesterday," he said, twirling spaghetti around his fork. I raised an eyebrow. "How did that go?" Dad chuckled. "About as well as you'd expect. She asked for money." "Actually? Seems the well has run dry on their end. Diane apparently spent everything she had on legal fees and moving costs." "What did you tell her?" "I suggested she look into student loans and part-time work, the character-building kind." He winked, and I laughed. "And how did she take that?" "Let's just say I doubt she'll be calling me Dad anymore." He set down his fork. "But that's not my news. Remember Linda from accounting?" I nodded. Dad's coworker of 15 years. A kind woman who'd always remembered my birthday, even when Dad forgot. "We've been seeing each other. Nothing serious yet, but it's nice." A faint blush colored his cheeks. "Dad, that's wonderful." I reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "Linda's great." As we finished our meal, I reflected on the tumultuous journey of the past year. The betrayal had been devastating, but in its aftermath, I'd discovered a strength I hadn't known I possessed. I'd also rekindled my relationship with my father, which had suffered under Diane's manipulative influence. "Oh, I almost forgot," Dad said as we waited for dessert. "Your graduation ceremony is next month, right?" I nodded. "May 15th. But you don't have to." "I'll be there," Dad interrupted firmly. "Front row, and I have something for you." He pulled an envelope from his jacket and slid it across the table. Inside, I found a check for $30,000. My eyes widened. Dad, I can't accept this. Yes, you can, Dad insisted. I've been saving again, every month since Thanksgiving. It's not what you should have had, but it's a start. For whatever you want, pay off more of your loans, put a down payment on a house, make repairs on that building of yours. Tears blurred my vision. Thank you, I whispered. No, Dad shook his head. Thank you for being strong enough to stand up for yourself when I failed to protect you. I'm so proud of the woman you've become, Jess, despite everything. Or maybe because of it. 18 months after graduation, I received an unexpected letter. The return address was from a town 3 hours away, where Diane had relocated after the divorce. For a moment, I considered throwing it away unopened, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a brief note in Diane's elegant handwriting. Amelia, I'm writing to inform you that I've listed you as a reference for the girls' financial aid applications. They're both finally taking their education seriously, and I think you'd agree they deserve a chance to improve themselves without the burden of excessive debt. The situation with the college fund was unfortunate. You'd always been intelligent and resourceful, qualities I admired, even when we didn't see eye to eye. In hindsight, there were many misunderstandings that could have been avoided. Your father's mother's china and some family photos were mistakenly packed with my things during the move. I've left them in a storage unit downtown. Key enclosed if you'd like to return them to him. Diane. I stared at the letter, incredulous at the audacity. No real apology, just a self-serving request and a subtle attempt to rewrite history as a misunderstanding rather than theft. The reference to me being intelligent and resourceful felt like she was actually saying, you managed fine without the money anyway. The storage unit contained exactly what Diane had described, family treasures that I knew my father had been quietly mourning. When I delivered them to his house that weekend, the joy on his face was worth more than any financial restitution. I thought these were gone forever, Dad said, carefully unpacking his mother's china. How did you find them? I handed him Diane's letter without comment. Dad read it silently, his expression unreadable. Do you think she means it? He finally asked, about the girls taking education seriously. I shrugged, maybe, but I'm definitely not serving as their reference. Dad smiled, pulling me into a hug. No, you don't need to, we're doing just fine on our own. 2 years after the fateful Thanksgiving that had changed everything, I hosted the holiday dinner in my new condo. Dad and Linda were there, their relationship now comfortably official. Uncle Paul came with his wife and son. A few of my closest friends rounded out the gathering. The condo, a modest but well-maintained one-bedroom unit in a decent neighborhood, represented my first step toward building my own assets. I'd purchased it using income from my rental property, combined with careful saving from my day job at a commercial real estate firm, where I'd been working since 6 months after graduation. The property management business was still a side venture, though a growing one. With guidance from my mentor at work, I'd slowly improved the apartment building, addressing the maintenance issues one by one as finances allowed. The building now consistently generated positive cash flow, though nothing that would make me rich overnight. Need any help? Dad asked, appearing at my elbow with an empty wine glass. I smiled, handing him a corkscrew. You can open another bottle of the red. Linda brought a pie that needs to go in the oven soon too. Dad nodded but lingered a moment longer than necessary. I'm proud of you, Jess. Not just for all this, he gestured around the modest but homey condo, but for how you've handled everything. I paused in my preparations. What do you mean? You could have let what Diane did define you, make you bitter. Instead, you used it as fuel. He shook his head admiringly. That takes character. Before I could respond, Linda joined us, sliding an arm around Dad's waist with easy affection. The table looks beautiful, Amelia. I love those centerpieces. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, and I returned to my hosting duties, my father's words settling warmly inside me. He was right. I had chosen to channel my anger into ambition rather than allowing it to consume me. The betrayal had been a catalyst, forcing me to advocate for myself in ways I might otherwise have avoided. As we passed dishes around the table, sharing stories and laughter, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. The betrayal I'd suffered had been painful, but it had also been transformative. I'd learned to stand up for myself, to demand justice, and to rebuild on my own terms. My phone buzzed with a text. Glancing down, I was surprised to see it was from Amber. Happy Thanksgiving. Started community college for real this time. Business administration. Mom's not happy about it. I showed the message to my father, who raised an eyebrow. Are you going to respond? I considered for a moment, then typed, good for you. Happy Thanksgiving. I set my phone aside, returning my attention to the people gathered around my table. My true family, bound by love and respect rather than manipulation and deceit. Everything okay? My father asked quietly. I smiled, raising my glass. Everything is perfect. To new beginnings, I toasted. As everyone echoed the toast, I felt the last weight of resentment lift from my shoulders. The college fund betrayal had nearly broken my family apart. But from those fragments, I'd built something stronger, truer, and ultimately more valuable than money could ever buy. 3.5 years after the revelation, I stood in the reception area of my small property management office. What had begun as managing my single apartment building had grown into a modest but stable business, overseeing 6 properties, including 2 that I now owned outright. The path to this success hadn't been linear. After working at the commercial real estate firm for 2 years, I'd taken a calculated risk by applying for a small business loan to purchase a second property, a duplex in need of renovation. The bank had initially been skeptical, but my detailed business plan, existing properties' performance, and excellent credit history had eventually won them over. The duplex renovation had taught me valuable lessons about construction management, contractor negotiations, and budget planning. I'd made mistakes along the way, hiring an unreliable plumber who disappeared mid-job, underestimating the extent of water damage in one unit, miscalculating permit timelines. Each setback had been frustrating but educational. By the 3-year mark, I'd saved enough to hire my first part-time employee, a maintenance coordinator who had proven invaluable. 6 months ago, I had taken the leap to open a small office and focus on my business full-time. My assistant poked her head in. Your 3 o'clock is here. I nodded, reviewing the application on my desk one last time. The candidate had modest but relevant experience with a property management certification. The only hesitation I felt came from the name at the top of the resume, Taylor Mitchell. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the reception area. My former stepsister looked different, less polished, more substantial somehow. The designer clothes and perfectly styled hair had been replaced by a simple blazer and a practical bob. Amelia, Taylor said, rising nervously to her feet. Thank you for seeing me. Let's talk in my office, I replied, gesturing toward the door. Once seated, an awkward silence stretched between us. Finally, Taylor spoke. I'm sure you're wondering why I applied here, of all places. I leaned back in my chair. The thought crossed my mind. Taylor fidgeted with the strap of her sensible handbag. After everything fell apart with Mom, I had to reevaluate a lot of things. I finished my associate's degree at community college, got an entry-level job in property management, and discovered I actually like the work. She paused. When I saw your company was hiring, I almost didn't apply, but then I thought maybe it would be a chance to show you that I've changed. I studied the young woman sitting across from me. The entitlement that had once radiated from Taylor was diminished, replaced by something more grounded. Why should I trust you? I asked directly. Taylor didn't flinch from the question. You probably shouldn't, at least not yet. I'd have to earn that trust. But I'm learning this business, and I'm willing to start at the bottom and prove myself. I glanced down at the resume again. The references checked out. I'd called them personally. The experience was basic, but she had completed relevant certifications. Where's Amber now? I asked, partly out of curiosity, partly to see how Taylor would respond. Taylor's expression softened slightly, finishing her associate's degree finally. She moved out of Mom's place last year and got an apartment with roommates. Taylor hesitated. We're still figuring things out between us. She blamed me for leaving Mom when she was struggling. I nodded slowly. I need to be honest with you, Taylor. When I saw your application, my first instinct was to throw it away. I understand, Taylor said quietly. But I continued. I believe in second chances, not blind ones though. I pulled out a document from my desk drawer. This would be a 6-month probationary position, lower salary than the job posting, detailed performance metrics, and weekly reviews. If there are any issues at all, or if I sense any dishonesty, you're out immediately. After 6 months, we reassess. Hope flickered across Taylor's face. Does that mean? It means you can start next Monday if these terms are acceptable. I held her gaze steadily. And to be clear, this is a professional relationship only. We're not suddenly family again. I understand, Taylor said quickly. Thank you for giving me a chance. I won't let you down. As Taylor left with a probationary contract to review, I wasn't entirely sure I'd made the right decision. I called my father that evening to tell him. Are you sure about this? Dad asked, concern evident in his voice. Not entirely, I admitted. But it's been over 3 years and people can change. Plus, I've built in every safeguard I can think of. Just be careful, he cautioned. Sometimes the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. I know, I assured him. I'm going into this with eyes wide open. The 6-month probation period was a mixed experience. Taylor was punctual and eager to learn, but her work required extensive correction at first. She had developed certain habits at her previous job that didn't align with my higher standards. There were also moments of the old Taylor, flashes of entitlement or defensiveness when receiving feedback though. These became less frequent as months passed. 4 months in, we had our first significant conflict when Taylor mishandled a maintenance emergency, telling a tenant with a water leak to wait until Monday rather than calling the emergency plumber. The incident cost me nearly $1,000 in repairs that could have been prevented with a proper response. This is exactly what I was afraid of, I said during our weekly review. Carelessness that costs money and damages tenant relationships. Taylor had initially become defensive but then surprised me by taking full responsibility. You're right. I made a bad call and it was expensive. I'm sorry, and I'll make sure it never happens again. She then outlined the steps she would take to prevent similar issues in the future. By the end of the 6 months, Taylor had proven herself competent, if not exceptional. I extended her employment with a modest raise and clearer responsibilities. Thank you for sticking with me, Taylor said when she accepted the permanent position. I know I wasn't your first choice. You've earned this, I replied professionally. But I still expect continuous improvement. Another 6 months passed, during which Taylor steadily gained my guarded professional trust. She never missed a day, volunteered for weekend showings, and developed a good rapport with most tenants. The business continued to grow, gradually adding another property to the management portfolio and increasing my reputation in the local market. Why did you really hire me? Taylor asked during her annual review. You could have thrown my application in the trash. I considered the question carefully. Because holding on to anger was exhausting, I finally said. And because everyone deserves a second chance if they're truly committed to earning it. Taylor nodded slowly. I think about it every day, you know. What we did to you, how unfair it was. Good, I said simply. Let that awareness guide your choices going forward. The conversation might have ended there, but I found myself adding, have you spoken with your mother recently? A shadow crossed Taylor's face. Not in a few weeks, she's struggling. The divorce settlement didn't leave her with much, and she's not handling the lifestyle adjustment well. She had to sell most of her jewelry last year to cover basic expenses. I hadn't heard much about Diane since the property transfer. Dad occasionally mentioned bits of gossip that filtered through mutual acquaintances, but I had deliberately maintained my distance, focusing on building my future rather than monitoring my past. And Amber? I asked, surprising myself with my curiosity. Taylor's expression softened slightly, finishing her associate's degree finally, still struggling to accept how much things have changed. She was closer to Mom, internalized more of her values. The adjustment has been harder for her. She hesitated. I've tried to talk to her about what happened, about taking responsibility, but it's taken her longer to get there. I nodded, recognizing the familiar pattern. Amber had always been more like Diane, quick to justify, slow to reflect. Some people take longer to face reality, I said, but I'm glad you did. As Taylor left my office, I felt a piece of a long puzzle click into place. The college fund betrayal had started as a story of theft and deception, but it had transformed into something unexpected, a catalyst for growth, for boundaries, for rebuilding on stronger foundations. Later that evening, I called my father to share the latest developments with my business. Dad and Linda had recently gotten engaged, A quiet affair with plans for a small ceremony in the spring. The joy in my father's voice when he spoke of Linda reminded me how far we'd both come from the dark days after Diane's betrayal. "Dad," I said impulsively, "do you ever regret how things turned out? Not exposing Diane more publicly, I mean." There was a thoughtful pause on the line. "Sometimes," Dad admitted, "when I think about how she manipulated us all for years, but then I look at where we are now and I can't say I'd change anything." He chuckled softly. "Besides, true justice isn't about public humiliation. It's about restoration, getting back what was taken, rebuilding what was broken. By that measure, I think we won." I smiled. My father had always had a way of cutting through complexity to find the core truth of a situation. "We did win," I agreed. "And not just because we got the money back. The betrayal in my father's eyes when he discovered the truth that Thanksgiving Day had indeed been just the beginning. What happened next was a testament to resilience, to justice tempered with wisdom, and ultimately to the power of choosing my own path forward." I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the old bank statements I'd kept as a reminder. After a moment's contemplation, I fed them into the shredder beside my desk. I didn't need them anymore. The past was settled, the future bright with possibility, and hard-won wisdom was waiting.